Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the last class, we discussed the consumer equilibrium under the marginal utility theory. In this class, we are going to discuss the consumer equilibrium under the indifference curve theory. Indifference curve theory means نظرية منحنيات السواء أو منحنى السواء. To understand the concept of indifference curve, let's take the following example. Suppose that we have a consumer, and this consumer consumes different bundle of goods or different combinations of goods of two products, the product X and Y. This is the bundle. The product X is bread. This is the quantity demanded of a bread. X, quantity demanded of a product Y, which is milk. Milk. Y. The total utility of X and Y, the total utility, and let us, this is the marginal rate of substitution. The bundle A, B, C, D. The bundle A, B, C, D. The quantity demanded of X, 1, 2, 3, 4. The quantity demanded of milk, Y, 10, 6, 4, 3. Our assumption is that we have a consumer, and this consumer consumes different bundle of bread and milk. So he consumes two products. The product 1 is milk, or the product X. The product Y is milk. And in the bundle A, the consumer consumes 1 unit or a piece of bread with 10 liters of milk, and suppose it gives him a total utility of 50 units or 50 utils. The bundle B, the consumer decided to increase his consumption of X or bread by 1 unit, and he decreased his consumption of Y to 6 by 4 units. And suppose this bundle B, which is 2 units of X and 6 units of Y, gives him the same total utility, 50. Bundle C, 3 units of X and 4 units of Y, gives him 50. D, 4 of X and 3 of Y, gives him the same total utility. Right? So as you see, the different combinations of, or the different bundles of X and Y, as you see, gives the consumer the same total utility or the same satisfaction. Let us draw the diagram or the graph that illustrates the relationship between X1, the quantity demanded of X1 and X2. This is the quantity demanded of Y, quantity of X. Quantity of X, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Quantity demanded of Y from 1 to 10. So suppose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. At the bundle A, the consumer consumes 1 unit of X and 10 units of Y. So 1 and 10. This is point A. At point B, the consumer consumes 2 units of X and 6 of Y. 2 with 6. B. C. 3 and 4. C. D. 4 and 3. Let us connect these points together. We will reach to the indifference curve. Indifference curve is, this is IC. IC is the abbreviation of indifference curve, IC, which gives the consumer 50 utils. Right? So, yes, excellent, Muhammad, because any point, as you see, any point along or lies along this curve gives the consumer the same satisfaction or the same utility. So as you see, the point A gives the consumer the utility of 50 utils, and B gives 50 utils, C, D, and so on. Right? So the indifference curve is what? The indifference curve is a graph, represents the different combinations of the product X and Y that gives the consumer, or that give the consumer the same satisfaction or the same utility. Right? So this is the concept of indifference curve. Right? As you see, if the consumer decided to increase his consumption of X by 1 unit, in the first case, he give up, or there is a giving up by 4 units. Right? And then when he decided to add additional unit from 2 to 3, he gave up 2 units, or the sacrifice. Then from 3 to 4, he gave up a 1 unit. So as you see that the giving up of Y, when he added additional units of X, in this case it's decreasing. Right? So it's called the marginal rate of substitution. Marginal rate of substitution. The marginal rate of substitutions is the increasing, or the percentage increase in, or that change in X over, or that delta Q, Y, the change in Y over the change in X. Right? It's called the marginal rate of substitution. MRS. MRS is the marginal rate of substitution. MRS is delta Y over delta X. And sometimes it's the absolute value of delta Y over delta X. Right? So to calculate MRS, put between point A and B. MRS, let's calculate it using this table. As you see, MRS is the absolute value of delta Y over delta X, or MRS equals Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. The absolute value. Right? In the first case, there is no change. Then, delta QY, 6 minus 10 over 2 minus 1. Minus 4, or the absolute value is 4. Right? So, in this case, when the consumer decided to add a 1 unit of X, he gave up 4 units of Y. This is the marginal rate of substitution. Then 2 units, 1 unit. Right? As you see, what happens to the MRS? It's decreasing. so we have an idea or a law of the law. It's called the law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. As a result of, or because the indifference curve, as you see, is convex toward the origin point. So let's discuss the concept or the characteristics of indifference curve, and then we will go to we will come back to the marginal rate of substitution, or the idea of marginal rate of substitution. The characteristics of indifference curve. Characteristics of indifference curve. We have 4 characteristics of indifference curve. Number 1, as you see, the indifference curve will be, as you see, a downward sloping or a negative downward sloping curve from left to the right. This is number 1, right? Number 2, because number 2, it's a convex toward the origin point. So if we look to, or we look at the indifference curve from the origin point, we will see it as a convex, محدب تجاه نقطة الأصل, right? This is number 2. Number 3, suppose that the consumer increase his consumption of X and his consumption of Y, the total utility would increase, right? So this leads to a rightward shifting of indifference curve. So suppose this is indifference curve 1. It gives the consumer 50 utils, QY, QX. If the consumer increases his consumption of X by with additional units X and Y, we have a new indifference curve. This is I2, IC2. Suppose it gives the consumer 60 utils. Additional quantity of X and Y leads to a rightward shifting of indifference curve. So in this case, the rightward shifting of indifference curve leads to increasing the total utility gain for the consumer, and vice versa for sure. If there is a leftward shifting of indifference curve, this means less satisfaction or lower satisfaction or lower utility. Number 4, the indifference curves would not intersect or interact with each others. Number 4, the indifference curves would not interact or intersect with each others. Why? Let's discuss or see the idea. Okay. The indifference curve, indifference curves would not interact with each others. Let us suppose that there is an intersection between the two indifference curves. Suppose that we have the following diagram, QY, QX, and this is the indifference curve 1, IC1, and this is IC2. our assumption is it's impossible to or the intersection between IC1 and IC2 is impossible. Why? Yes. Suppose this is point A, point B, C, D, E. As you know that each point lies along indifference curve 1 are equals. Yes, they will give the consumer the same utility. And each point lies along indifference curve 1 gives the consumer the same satisfaction. So B equals A equals E, because these combinations gives the consumer the same satisfaction. So B equals A equals E, because they lies along the same indifference curve, IC2. IC2. What about CAD? C equals A equals D. C equals A equals D. Right? Because they lie along the same indifference curve. IC1. Right? Mathematically, if B equals A equals E, C equals A equals D, in this case B must equal A, C must equal D, and B must equal C, E must equal D.
And that's illogical.
It's illogical. Let's come back to the diagram. So mathematically, when B equals A equal E, C equals A equals D, B must equal C, B must equal C, and E must equal D. Let's come back to the graph. Do a comparison between B and C. B gives larger utility than C. So B is larger than C because it gives the consumer larger utility than C. D is larger than E. So it's illogical. Mathematically, B must equal C, E must equal D. Economically, B is larger than C because it gives the consumer larger utility. D is larger than E, and in this case it gives the consumer larger utility. So we reach to illogical results. Right? Okay. We have two or three forms or two other forms for indifference curve. We have two other forms for the indifference curve. When the indifference curve is similar to a unitary demand curve, IC, QY, QX. In this case, if the consumer decided, suppose that we are at point A, or the combination A, 1, 10, if the consumer decided to increase his consumption of X by 1 unit, he would decline his or decrease his consumption of Y by 1 unit. the percentage increasing in x equals the percentage change in y. In this case, it's called a perfect substitution between x and y. There is a perfect substitution between these two products. Perfect substitution between x and y. What about MRS in this case? MRS equals delta y over the absolute value of delta y over delta x equals 1. Because the change in x or in y equals the change in y, or the change in x equals the change in y. MRS equals 1. In this case, there is a full substitution or a perfect substitution between x and y. We have another case when indifference curve is vertical then horizontal line, qy, qx. This is indifference curve. There is no relationship between the quantity of x and the quantity of y. So there is no substitution. So suppose that we were at point A and the consumer decided to increase 1, 2, 10. Suppose that the consumer decided to increase his consumption of x by 1 unit. There is no change on the quantity purchased or consumed of y. So in this case, there is no relationship. There is no substitution between the good x and y. So it's called, there's no substitution between x and y. Right? Okay. We have, let us suppose that the indifference curve is an upward slope or has an upward sloping. Is it possible? Q, Y, QX. And this suppose that we have this indifference curve. Do a comparison between A and B. At this point, point A, suppose that the consumer consumes 7 units of Y and 3 units of X. At P or B, he decided to increase his consumption of X by 1 unit, 4, and this it increased by 3 units. Does the utility gain or obtained from A equals the utility gained or obtained from B? Which gives the consumer larger utility? B. Excellent, Muhammad. Yes. In this case, if he consumes 3 units of X and 7 units of Y, suppose it gives him 50 yetters. When he decided to increase his consumption of X by 1 unit and increase his consumption of Y to 10 unit or by 3 units, yes, in this case the total utility would increase. So in this case, this combination or the combination B would give the consumer larger utility than A. So it's impossible to be as indifference curve. So indifference curves the indifference curve is always negative and downward sloping. Negative, downward slope. Right? Because our assumption is that each or any point, each combination lies along the same demand indifference curve, gives the consumer the same total utility. So it's not logical to be an upward sloping. صح؟ طيب. I will come back to the slope of indifference curve. The slope of indifference curve. Is there a problem so far? Okay. Perfect. Let's derive the slope of indifference curve. Slope of indifference curve. To derive the slope of indifference curve, let's draw the indifference curve and do the analysis. Suppose this is the indifference curve. IC, QY, QX, point AB, Q1, QY1, QY2, then a QX1, QX2. To calculate the slope of indifference curve, we must take مقابل على المجاور. مظبوط ولا لا؟ اللي هو delta y over delta x. So the slope of indifference curve is delta y over delta x, or QY2 minus QY1 over QX2 minus QX1. Slope of IC. A QY2 is smaller than QY1 and QX2 is larger than QX1, so it would be negative, right? So the slope of IC is negative, or minus delta QY or delta Y على delta QX بيطلع بالماينس هذا. It's always negative, right? Okay.
Equals delta Bx minus delta Bx over delta By.
We are coming to this point. Just a moment, please. So, the slope of indifference curve is delta y or delta qy over delta qx, and it's always negative. We have another way to calculate the slope of indifference curve. We have another way to calculate the slope of indifference curve. As you see, or as you know, that indifference curve illustrates what? It illustrates the utility gained or obtained for the consumer when he consumes, yes, different combinations of x and y. So suppose that we have a change in total utility of x and a change in total utility of y. If the total utility of x increased, the total utility of y should decline with the same amount to keep the same total utility, right? To understand the idea, let's come back to the marginal utility theory. MUX equals how much? Delta TUX over delta QX. Delta TUX over delta QX, right? So, let's derive the total utility of x, or the change in total utility of x. In this case, delta TU of x must equal MUX times delta QX. MUX times delta QX. This is the first formula. What about MUY? MUY equals delta TUY over delta QY, right? Let's derive the change in total utility of y. Delta TU of y equals MUY times delta QY, right? let's come back. This is the second equation or formula. Let's come back to the indifference curve. The indifference curve, as you know, is a downward sloping from left to the right. I see, suppose it equals, or the total utility gained or obtained by this indifference curve equals 50 yetons, right? And suppose this is point A, point B. 1, 2, 10, 8. As you know that each point along the indifference curve gives the consumer the same total utility. At point A, the consumer consumes 1 unit of X. This is QY, QX, right? At point A, the consumer consumes 1 unit of X and 10 units of Y, right? And it gives him 50 yetons. At B, if he decided to increase his consumption of X, or in this case, the total utility of X would increase. So, delta TUX would increase. Right? And if he decided to decrease or decline his consumption of Y, the total utility of Y would decline. Right? To keep the same indifference curve or the same total utility. Suppose that the total utility is 50 and he increased his consumption of X. Suppose that he gained or obtained additional 10 units of utility or 10 units of X. For Y, the decreasing in total utility of Y must equal the increasing total utility of X to keep the same total utility. Right? So, in this case, the change or the increasing in total utility of X must equal the decreasing in total utility of Y. So, suppose that the total utility of X increased by 10. The total utility of Y would decline by 10 to keep the same total utility of 50. Right? So, in this case, MUX times delta X or delta QX must equal MUY times delta QY. And in this case, it would be negative because there is a decreasing in line. So, minus delta QY over delta X QX جيب الطرفين هيك must equal MUX over MUY. This is the slope of indifference curve, right? Let's come back to the previous point. The slope of indifference curve is delta QY over delta X. صح? When minus. Yes. Okay. So this is the marginal rate of substitute or the slope of indifference curve, and this is the slope of indifference curve as well. Right? Okay. Let's go to another issue or another topic. Which is the budget line. Before starting the budget line or خط الميزانية, I have a question. What is the indifference curve? The indifference curve, yes.
The combination of from X and Y
Yes.
that give the same utility or satisfaction for the consumer.
Excellent. So it illustrates what? It illustrates the willingness of the consumer to maximize his utility. So indifference curve, I see, illustrates the willingness of the consumer to buy or to to purchase different combinations of X and Y, right? Yes, to increase his satisfaction or utility. Let's go to the budget line, which is related to the consumer equilibrium under the indifference curve theory. Budget line. In Arabic, it's خط الميزانية. Suppose that you have a $1,000 or you receive a salary of $20. Your salary, your income as a consumer equals $20 a day. And the price of X, suppose it was $4 per unit. Price of X equals $4 per unit. And the price of Y equals $2 per unit. If you decided to spend all of your income to buy only X, قديش بتقدر تشتري؟ A QF of X, if you decided to buy only units of X, QX equals the income over the price of X. So the quantity equals, quantity of X must equal 20 over 4. How much? 5. So you can buy 5 units of X and 0 of Y because you decided to spend all of your income to buy only X. So in this case, the quantity of Y must equal 0. What about if you decided to spend all of your income to buy only Y? QY equals income over the price of Y. 20 over 2 equals 10. So if you decided to spend all of your income to buy Y, in this case you can buy 10 units of Y and 0 of X. Right? So let us draw this graph and come back to the analysis. QY, QX. When Y from 1 to 10, suppose 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As we mentioned that if the consumer decided to spend all of his income to buy only X, how much does he purchase? 5 units of X. If he wants to buy only Y, 10 units of Y. If we connect these 2 points together in a one line, we will reach to the budget line. خط الميزانية. Budget line. So the budget line illustrates the ability for the consumer to buy different goods and services. Right? So, and this area is called the budget constraint. this area under this line is called the budget constraint. Budget constraint. قيد الميزانية، انه انا مقيد بالميزانية. تمام؟ طيب. Suppose that the consumer income increased from 20 to 40 or to 15. Suppose, or to 26. Suppose income increased to 26 instead of 20, and the prices of X and Y remain constant at the origin price here. So price of X remains constant at 4, and the price Y remains constant at 2. Draw the new budget line. As you see, when income increased to 26 and the price of X constant, we have a new quantity of X. So the new quantity of X new equals I new, or the new I over the price of X. How much? 26 over 4.
6.5.
6 point how much?
5.
5. Okay. This is the new quantity of X. What about the quantity of Y if the consumer decided to spend all of his income to buy only Y under the new income?
13.
Let's calculate it. QY in U equals I in U over PY. 26 over 2 equals how much? 13. So we have a new budget line. Let's come back to this diagram to explain the change in the budget line. The new X is 6.5, and the new is 13. The quantity of Y is 13 here. Let's connect these 2 points. Here, 13. We have a new budget line. So there is a rightward shifting of the budget line. This is the new budget line. So as you see, when the consumer income increased, this leads to a rightward shifting of the budget line, and the budget constraint is increased or has increased to. This is the new budget constraint. Yes. So in this case, the budget constraint increased, or the ability of the consumer to buy different goods increased as a result of increasing of his income, right? Suppose that the prices or the consumer income remains constant at 20, and the prices of X changed, where the price of Y is constant. So our assumption is, suppose that the consumer income remains constant at 26, at 20, the price of X declined to 2, and the price of Y remains constant at 2. What would happen to the budget line? Suppose this is the origin budget line. QY, QX. How much was the quantity y? 10. And the quantity of x? 5. Our assumption is, suppose that the income remains constant at 20, the price of x declined, the price of y constant. Then you, yes, we will calculate it. The qx, or the new qx in this case, equals I over px equals 20 over 2, 10. Q1 would remain constant. 20 over 2 equals 10. So, in this case, a quantum y remains constant and the q of x increased to 10. So, here we have a new budget line. In this case, there is a rightward shifting of the budget line curve toward x, not y. At y, it's still constant. It remains constant, right? So, what about the slope in this case? Yes, it has decreased. The slope of budget line declined, right? Okay. Suppose that the consumer income remains constant, the price of x remains constant at 4, and the price of x of y increased to 3. What would happen to the budget line? Yes, I'm not talking now about the slope, but we are going to derive a new budget line, and then we will talk about the slope, right? Okay, so this is the origin budget line. Qx will still constant, remain constant. 20 over 4 equals 5. Qy equals 20 over 3 equals how much? 6.9 or 70? 23 0.3 6.9 يمكن 0.8. Okay, so in this case a quantum x remains constant and the quantum y increased or declined to 6.8. 6.6. Okay. So in this case we have a new budget line. There is a leftward shifting or inward shifting toward the QY, and the quantum x remains constant. Right? What about the slope in this case? Decline. Yes, the slope, as you see, the slope has declined. Right? We have, suppose that the prices of x increased and the prices of y remains constant and income remains constant as well. So suppose in the prices of y 2, price of x increased to 6. What about the new quantity of x and the new quantity of y? Quantity of x equals 20 over 6. How much? 3.3. And the quantity of y would remain constant. 20 over 2 equals 10. The quantity of y, sorry, yes, this is the origin equilibrium or the origin budget line. In this case, the quantity of x declined to 3.3 and the quantity of y remains constant. The slope increased. right? Okay, طيب. Suppose that the price of X increased and the price of Y decreased. So suppose how much the origin price of X 24, price of Y 2. Suppose that the price of X increased to 6, the price of Y increased to 4. So suppose there is an increasing in the prices of X and Y. It would lead to a reduction in the ability for the consumer to purchase. But let us discuss the effect QY, QX. And this is the origin budget line 10, 5. QX would 3.3. What about PY 20 over 4? 5. So the quantum X would become 3.3. Quantum Y is 5. So there is a leftward shifting of budget line. Right? Okay. Let us assume that the prices of X increased by 6 and the price of Y declined to 1. The price of X declined to 6. The price of Y declined to 1. In the first case, and the income for sure remains constant. 20 over 6 equals 3.3. 20 over 1 equals 20. Right? So, a quantum Y would increase to 20, and the quantum X declined to 3.3. So, the budget line would be as follows. This is the new budget line, right? Okay. Let's go to derive the budget equation or formula. The budget line formula. The budget line formula. To derive the budget line formula or equation, as you know that the consumer spends, or our assumption is that the consumer spends all of his income or distributes his income to buy only 2 goods. I equals the price of X times QX plus the price of Y plus times QY. We are going to calculate QY, the quantity demanded of Y. QY, to calculate the QY, PY times the QY equals I minus PX for QX. Right? To get rid of PY, عشان نتخلص من PY, قسم الطرفين على PY. So, PY QY over PY equals I over PY minus PX QX over PY. QY equals I over PY minus PX over PY times QX. This is the general formula for the budget line, or the general equation for the budget line. Let's come back to our example to derive the budget line equation. Our assumption is the consumer income equals 20. The price of X equals how much? 4. PY equals 2. Right? And we drew the budget line. This is the budget line, QY QX, and the budget line was as follows. QX. This was 10, 5. Let us derive the quantity of Y, or the budget line in this case. The budget line in this case, we have to use this formula. So عندي QY equals LI equals 20 over the price of Y. How much? 2 minus the price of X, 4 over 2 times a QX. So QY equals 10 minus 2 of QX. This is the budget line equation. Right? So suppose that X was equal 4. How much does or is a QY? Suppose that the quantity demanded of X was 4. How much is? We are going to use the following formula to calculate the quantity of Y. So at a QX equals 4. QY equals 10 minus 2 times 4 equals 10 minus 8 equals 2. So QY equals 2. In this case, the quantity of Y must equal 2. Right? 10 ناقص 2. تمام. طيب. At this point, suppose that the consumer or the X is or was 3. How much is the QY? We have to use the same equation. QY equals 10 minus 2 times the new quantity of X, 3, equals 4. So in this case, it equals 4. Let's come back to this formula. 10 is the intercept of the budget line with the vertical line, right? And this is the slope, minus 2 is the slope of budget line. We have two ways to calculate the slope of budget line. The slope of the budget line the slope of budget line, we have two ways to calculate the slope of budget line. Number one, as you see, the budget line is a straight line. The slope is delta QY over delta QX. مظبوط؟ Slope equals delta QY over delta QX. Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus Q1 X1. هذا suppose انه كان A B. هذا بيكون عندي this is Y1 Y2 X1 X2, right? So Y2 4 minus Y1 2 over X2 3 minus 4 minus 2. This is the slope of the budget line. What about, we have another formula to calculate the slope of budget line, which is minus px over py, or this part of the formula, it's minus 2. So the slope, another way to calculate the slope of budget line, slope of budget line equals minus px over py. the price of X is how much? 4. So the slope of budget line equals minus 4 over 2 equals minus 2. So in all cases we reach to the same results, right? Who has any problem so far? So let us summarize our talking about the budget line and its relationship with income and the price of X and Y. Suppose this is the origin budget line, QY, QX. Increasing the consumer income leads to what? A rightward shifting of the budget line. So this is the new equilibrium budget line, or the new budget line. This is number 1. Number 2, as a result of the increasing in the consumer income, this means his ability to buy, his ability to purchase different goods and services would increase. The reduction in the consumer income leads to a leftward shifting of in budget line. This means his ability to buy different goods or the goods and services would decline. Okay. If the prices of X when the prices of X increase, his ability to buy or the quantum X would decline. According to the demand theory, increasing the prices of X leads to a reduction in the quantity demanded of X. So, suppose that the prices of X increase. In this case, the quantity demanded of X would decline. In this case, there is a leftward shifting of the budget line toward the QX, right? And at Y, it would still constant, remains constant, right? If the prices of Y, of X, decline, this leads to increasing quantity of X. So, we have a new quantity of X, and the quantity of Y remains constant in this case, right? So, there is the slope of the budget line would decline, right? So there is a positive relationship between the price of X and the slope of the budget line, because the slope equals minus Px over Py. When the price of X increased, the slope would increase. When the price of Y increased, the slope would decline. A reduction in the prices of X leads to a reduction in the slope of budget line. A reduction in the prices of Y leads to increasing of the slope of budget line. Thank you.